What would you think if I told you that the woman sitting across from you at dinner, the one who seems so mysteriously self-contained, so effortlessly magnetic, carries within her the invisible architecture of her family's deepest secrets, that every gesture she makes, every word she chooses, every way she moves through, the world has been sculpted by forces she doesn't even consciously remember. The silent shadows of birth order that Alfred Adler discovered lurking in the depths of every family system, like hidden gods determining destiny. She doesn't know it yet, but she is living out an ancient drama that began before her first breath, a psychological inheritance passed down through the sacred and twisted dynamics of sibling rivalry, parental favoritism, and the desperate scramble for love that defines every family constellation. Her entire personality, her deepest fears, her most irresistible attractions, her patterns of sabotage and success, all of it choreographed by her position in the family, hierarchy by the role she was assigned before she had language to protest or power to choose differently. The firstborn daughter carries a particular kind of darkness, a shadow that Adler identified as the weight of impossible expectations and the terror of being dethroned. She learned early that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned through perfection, that her worth was measured by her ability to carry the family's hopes and dreams on her small shoulders. This is the woman who becomes the overachiever, the responsible one, the one who can't rest until everyone around her is taken care of, but who secretly burns with resentment at the burden she never asked to carry. Watch her in relationships, this eldest daughter who has learned to love through service and sacrifice. She attracts partners who need rescuing, who require her strength to compensate for their weakness, who mistake her competence for a lack of need. But beneath her capable exterior lies a woman starving for someone to take care of her, someone strong enough to let her finally put down the weight of being everyone else's salvation. Her birth order shadow whispers that if she isn't useful, she isn't lovable, a lie that shapes every choice she makes. The middle child carries a different darkness, the shadow of invisibility, and the desperate hunger for significance. Caught between the achievement-oriented firstborn and the indulged youngest, she learned that attention was scarce and had to be fought for, that her place in the family was never guaranteed, that she existed in a liminal space where her voice could easily be drowned out by louder, more demanding siblings. This is the woman who becomes the peacemaker, the negotiator, the one who learns to read the emotional temperature of every room and adjust herself accordingly. Her shadow manifests in relationships as a chameleon-like quality that both attracts and repels. She becomes whatever she thinks you want her to be, but in doing so, she loses touch with who she actually is. Her birth order obsession drives her to seek relationships where she can finally be seen, truly seen for her authentic self, but her pattern of adapting and accommodating makes authentic connection nearly impossible. She attracts partners who are drawn to her flexibility but who ultimately leave her feeling invisible, reinforcing the original wound of never being enough to claim center stage. The youngest child carries perhaps the most complex shadow of all, the darkness of eternal infantilization, combined with the intoxicating power of being the family's chosen one. She learned that charm could get her what effort couldn't, that being adorable was more valuable than being capable, that her needs would always be met by others who found her helplessness endearing. This is the woman who becomes the eternal muse, the one who inspires others to greatness while remaining mysteriously unable to achieve it herself. Her relationships become theaters where she performs her practiced helplessness, drawing in partners who mistake her vulnerability for authenticity, her need for innocence. But beneath the surface lies a woman who has never learned to trust her own strength, who has been robbed of the confidence that comes from facing challenges alone. Her birth order shadow convinces her that she is too delicate for the harsh realities of adult life, that she needs protection rather than empowerment, a belief that keeps her trapped in cycles of dependence and disappointment. These are the silent shadows that Adler identified as the hidden architects of personality, the unconscious forces that shape behavior long before conscious choice enters the picture. Each birth order position creates its own unique form of family obsession, its own way of seeking love and avoiding abandonment, its own pattern of compensation for the original, wound of not being enough exactly as she was. The only child carries the most paradoxical shadow of all, the darkness of being everything and nothing simultaneously. She grew up as the sole focus of her parents' attention, the repository of all their hopes and fears, the one who had to be perfect because there was no one else to carry the burden of their expectations. This is the woman who learned that she was both infinitely precious and impossibly flawed, that love came with the crushing weight of being the only one who could fulfill her parents' dreams or destroy them. Her shadow manifests as a profound ambivalence about intimacy. She craves connection but fears engulfment, desires independence but panics at isolation. She attracts partners who are fascinated by her intensity but who ultimately can't handle the pressure of being her entire world. Her birth order obsession creates a pattern where she either smothers relationships with her total focus or abandons them when they inevitably fail to meet her impossible standards. She has never learned to share space, to compromise, to exist in the messy middle ground where most healthy relationships live. But here's where Adler's dangerous. Truth reveals itself. These shadows aren't curses to be broken, they're power sources waiting to be harnessed. The woman who understands her birth order programming doesn't try to escape it. She learns to dance with it, to transform its limitations into strengths, to use its patterns as stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks. She recognizes that her family obsession isn't a weakness to be overcome, but a map to be decoded, a sacred text written in the language of early attachment and survival. The eldest daughter's shadow of over-responsibility becomes her superpower when she learns to choose what she carries rather than automatically shouldering every burden. She discovers that her natural leadership abilities, her capacity for seeing the big picture, her talent for bringing order to chaos, these aren't obligations but gifts. When she stops trying to save everyone and starts choosing whom to serve, she becomes magnetic in a way that effortless competence always is. Her birth order wound transforms into her greatest asset when she learns to use her strength to attract equals rather than dependence. The middle child's shadow of invisibility becomes her gift of intuitive understanding, her ability to read between the lines, to sense what others need before they know it themselves. She learns that her adaptability isn't a weakness but a sophisticated form of emotional intelligence, that her capacity to see all sides of a situation makes her an invaluable mediator and counselor. When she stops trying to be noticed and starts trusting her unique perspective, she becomes the woman others turn to for wisdom, the one who can hold space for complexity without needing to resolve it. The youngest child's shadow of helplessness becomes her power to inspire and enchant, her ability to bring out the protective and nurturing instincts in others without manipulating or demanding. She learns that her natural charm and creativity are legitimate talents, that her ability to see wonder in everyday moments is a gift that can heal a world grown cynical and hard. When she stops performing vulnerability and starts embodying authentic openness, she becomes irresistible, not because she needs rescuing, but because she reminds others of their own capacity for joy and spontaneity. The only child's shadow of all-or-nothing thinking becomes her capacity for total devotion, her ability to focus with laser intensity on what matters to her. She learns that her high standards aren't impossible expectations, but discerning taste, that her need for depth over breadth is a valuable quality in a world obsessed with surface-level connections. When she stops trying to be everything to everyone and starts being everything to herself, she becomes the woman who attracts others through her self-containment, her refusal to settle for mediocrity in any area of her life. This is the alchemical transformation that Adler understood but rarely articulated. The birth order wound becomes the birth order gift when it's consciously integrated rather than unconsciously acted out. The woman who can see her family patterns clearly, who can recognize her programmed responses without being controlled by them, who can use her birth order awareness as a tool for growth rather than an excuse for limitation. This is the woman who transcends her origins while honoring them. She learns to read the birth order, shadows in others as well, to understand why her firstborn partner needs to control everything, why her middle child friend constantly seeks approval, why her youngest sister still expects to be taken care of. This understanding doesn't make her responsible for fixing their patterns, but it does give her the wisdom to respond rather than react, to see their behavior as information rather than attack. The transformation deepens when she realizes that her birth order obsession was never really about her siblings at all. It was about her desperate attempt to secure unconditional love in a system where love always came with conditions. The family constellation that shaped her wasn't just about where she fell in the sequence of children. It was about the unspoken rules, the invisible hierarchies, the silent agreements that governed how affection was distributed, how attention was earned, how worth was measured in the sacred and profane theater of family life. She begins to see that every family creates its own mythology, its own pantheon of roles and expectations that children must inhabit to survive. The responsible one, the rebel, the peacemaker, the entertainer, the invisible one, the golden child, the scapegoat. These aren't just birth order positions but archetypal characters in the family drama, each carrying their own shadow and their own potential for transformation. She understands now that she wasn't born into her role. She was cast into it by forces beyond her control, and she has the power to rewrite the script. The woman who has integrated her birth order shadow possesses a kind of psychological X-ray vision, able to see through the surface presentations of others to the wounded children beneath. She recognizes the eldest daughter's perfectionism as a plea for approval, the middle child's people-pleasing as a bid for visibility, the youngest's drama as a cry for attention. But this recognition doesn't fill her with judgment or the need to fix. Instead, it fills her with compassion and the wisdom to respond to the need rather than the behavior. Her relationships become laboratories for this new understanding. She no longer attracts partners who fit her old birth order pattern of seeking what she missed in childhood. Instead, she attracts people who complement her integrated wholeness, who can appreciate both her strengths and her growth edges without trying to complete her or be completed by her. She learns to love others not from the wounded place of her birth order programming, but from the healed place of her conscious choice. The shadow work required for this transformation is not gentle or easy. It requires her to face the truth about her family system, to see her parents not as the gods or monsters of her childhood imagination, but as flawed humans doing their best with their own unhealed wounds. It means acknowledging the ways she was failed without drowning in victim consciousness, recognizing the gifts she received without minimizing the damage that was done. This is the work of the mature, feminine psyche, holding paradox without needing to resolve it, seeing complexity without needing to simplify it. She learns to distinguish between her authentic needs and her conditioned responses, between her true desires and her programmed patterns. The eldest daughter discovers that her need for control isn't really about wanting power over others, it's about wanting safety in an unpredictable world. The middle child realizes that her need for approval isn't about being needy. It's about wanting to be valued for who she is rather than what she does. The youngest understands that her need for attention isn't about being spoiled. It's about wanting to be seen and celebrated for her unique gifts. This is where the Stoic wisdom becomes invaluable. Marcus Aurelius taught that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to what happens to us. The woman who has integrated her Birth order shadow embodies this principle completely. She cannot change her family of origin, cannot undo the programming she received, cannot rewrite the past. But she can choose how she interprets her experience, how she uses her conditioning, how she responds to the triggers that once controlled her. The family obsession that once felt like a prison becomes a source of profound wisdom about human nature. She understands the invisible forces that shape behavior, the unconscious patterns that govern relationships, the wounded places where people most need healing. This understanding makes her magnetic, not because she's trying to attract others, but because she's become fully herself, integrated and whole, shadow and light dancing together in perfect balance. Her presence alone becomes healing for others who are still trapped in their birth order patterns. She doesn't try to rescue or fix them, she simply models what it looks like to be free from the unconscious compulsions that once governed her own life. She shows them that it's possible to honor their origins without being enslaved by them, to understand their programming without being controlled by it. The profound realization arrives like dawn breaking over a landscape she's never seen before. Her birth order obsession was actually her psyche's way of protecting her from the ultimate truth that she was never competing with her siblings for love. She was competing with ghosts. The phantom children her parents carried in their own wounded hearts, the idealized versions of themselves they projected onto their offspring, the unlived lives they desperately hoped their children would fulfill. She sees now that the family constellation was never about the children at all. It was about the parents' unhealed relationship with their own siblings, their own birth order wounds, their own desperate attempts to rewrite their childhood stories through their children. This understanding shatters the last illusion of her family mythology. She realizes that her eldest sister's perfectionism wasn't about being naturally responsible, it was about carrying their mother's unlived dreams of achievement. Her middle brother's rebellion wasn't about being naturally defiant, it was about expressing their father's unexpressed rage at his own invisible childhood. Her youngest sister's neediness wasn't about being naturally dependent, it was about fulfilling their parents' desire to feel needed and important. Each child became a vessel for their parents' unfinished psychological business, a living sacrifice to their unexamined wounds. The woman who reaches this level of understanding experiences a profound liberation. She stops taking her family's reactions personally because she understands that they were never really seeing her. They were seeing their own projections, their own fears, their own desperate hopes, reflected back at them. The criticism that once devastated her, the favoritism that once enraged her, the neglect that once broke her heart, none of it was really about her. It was about her parents' inability to see past their own psychological blind spots to the actual human being standing before them. This is the moment of her psychological birth when she stops trying to earn love from people who were never capable of giving it freely, when she stops trying to heal relationships that were broken before she arrived, when she stops trying to fix family patterns that were established generations before her existence. She understands now that her birth order obsession was a symptom of something much deeper, her refusal to accept that she was born into a system that could never give her what she needed, that her only choice was to give it to herself. The integration of this truth transforms every aspect of her being. She no longer seeks relationships that replicate her family dynamics because she has no need to relive her childhood drama. She doesn't attract partners who trigger her birth order wounds because she has transmuted those wounds into wisdom. She stops trying to prove her worth to people who remind her of her parents because she has learned to validate herself from within. The compulsive patterns that once governed her choices dissolve into conscious preference. Reactive behavior transforms into responsive action. Her relationships become mirrors of her internal transformation. She attracts people who can see her for who she actually is, not who they need her to be. She forms connections based on mutual appreciation rather than complementary dysfunction. She creates intimate bonds that support her growth rather than enabling her patterns. This is the woman who has learned to love from wholeness rather than woundedness, to give from abundance rather than deficit, to receive from openness rather than desperation. The shadow work culminates in a profound act of forgiveness, not the sentimental kind that minimizes damage or excuses harmful behavior, but the fierce kind that refuses to let past wounds poison present possibilities. She forgives her parents for their inability to see her clearly, her siblings for their participation in the family mythology, herself for believing that she was responsible for earning love that should have been given freely. This forgiveness isn't about reconciliation or relationship repair. It's about internal liberation, about freeing herself from the prison of resentment and expectation. She becomes the woman who breaks generational patterns simply by refusing to perpetuate them. Her children, if she chooses to have them, will grow up with a mother who sees them clearly, who doesn't project her own wounds onto their behavior, who can love them for who they are rather than who she needs them to be. Her romantic partnerships become models of healthy attachment rather than reenactments of childhood trauma. Her friendships become celebrations of authentic connection rather than desperate attempts to fill childhood voids. The dangerous truth that Adler discovered, that families create the psychological templates that govern our entire lives, becomes her greatest gift when she learns to rewrite those templates consciously. She understands that she is not destined to repeat her family's patterns, that she has the power to create new ones, that her birth order programming was just the starting point for her psychological journey, not the final destination. The final metamorphosis occurs when she realizes that her birth order was never her identity, it was her initiation. Every wound she carried, every pattern she inherited, every shadow she integrated was preparing her for this moment of sovereign selfhood, where she stands free from the invisible chains of family programming. She understands now that her obsession with her place in the family constellation was actually her soul's way of ensuring she would eventually transcend it, that her desperate need for validation was the catalyst that would ultimately teach her to validate herself. She moves through the world now with a quality that others find both magnetic and mysterious, the presence of someone who has been to the underworld of family dysfunction and emerged with treasures that can't be taken away. Her birth order shadow has become her superpower, not because she's escaped her conditioning, but because she's transformed it into consciousness. She carries the wisdom of her position without being trapped by its limitations, honors her origins without being enslaved by them. The woman who has completed this journey possesses an almost supernatural ability to see through the facades that others present. She recognizes the eldest daughter's perfectionism as a request for permission to be human, the middle child's people-pleasing as a desire to be chosen for who she is, the youngest's drama as a need to be taken seriously. But this recognition doesn't burden her with the responsibility to fix everyone. Instead, it fills her with compassion for the universal human struggle to be seen and loved authentically. Her relationships become sacred, spaces where others can experience what it feels like to be loved, without conditions, to be seen, without judgment, to be accepted, without having to perform. She doesn't try to heal their birth order wounds. She simply models what it looks like to be free from them. Her presence alone becomes a form of activism, a quiet revolution against the generational patterns that have kept families trapped in cycles of conditional love and unconscious projection. The integration is complete when she realizes that her family obsession was never really about her family at all. It was about her refusal to accept that she was born complete, that her worth was never dependent on her position in any hierarchy, that her value was inherent rather than earned. She sees now that every moment of feeling inadequate, every desperate attempt to secure love, every painful comparison with siblings was her ego's way of avoiding the terrifying truth of her own magnificence. She learns to trust the intelligence of her own psyche to recognize that even her most painful patterns were serving a purpose, preparing her for a level of consciousness that could only be reached through the specific initiations her family provided. Her birth order wasn't a mistake or a limitation. It was the perfect laboratory for developing the exact qualities she would need to fulfill her unique destiny. The eldest daughter's burden became her capacity for leadership. The middle child's invisibility became her gift for seeing what others miss. The youngest dependence became her ability to inspire others to give their best.